Good afternoon, traders. This is Christian from Hertz Trade Group, and this is your end of day and also end of week recap for Friday, July 28th. And this is basically it. Well, just about it for the month of July, traders. Another month just about in the books. We do have Monday, which is the last trading day of the month. So it's not fully complete, but I think you got a pretty good picture so far as what July was, as well as so far, how earnings are turning out. So we will get to all of that. Risk disclaimer in front of you. Everything that we're going through is for information purposes only, not giving out any advice or recommendations. So in this video, end of week, I like to kind of talk a little bit bigger picture. And so, yes, I will recap all of the week's performance for you, not only in the indices, but also in the sectors and really what stood out. And I've got a couple of areas that I want to talk about. So I'm excited to get into that. But I also like to cover in the first couple minutes macro and some of the things that we talked about in yesterday's video. I always kind of try to do a continuation of some of the bigger concepts that we talked about in yesterday's video. For example, I went on and on yesterday about bonds, and bonds were okay today, right? I mean, that was the big thing yesterday about yields going higher, right? And that worries me tremendously. And if you heard my video from yesterday, or watched my video from yesterday, I should say, then that it does trouble me when we have yields going up faster. So I'm going to start with that chart and get that out of the way, and then we can talk about the indices and get into some of that nitty gritty, as well as some, what I think some of the takeaways from earnings are. So here's where we are with bonds, right? And again, this is concerning to me when yields really spike, because it does make equities more expensive. So for now, all we have so far is basically how we closed. It does look a bit similar to what we did back here. Remember, this was the beginning of July, and equities got hit on this a bit as yields went higher. And once bonds begin to rally, and they rallied right into that resistance of the bottom of the July value area, then they turned around, and started to head south, with that culminating with, a big move down yesterday. So, a nice hammer bar is a start. And if we begin to kind of bounce, I think that would kind of, put the bond analysis on the shelf a little bit. I don't like to be looking at bonds every day. I just know that it's something to focus on when yields really start to move quickly, right? When yields don't move, if it's more of a gradual move, or if we go sideways, right, then we don't need to look at the bond chart as equity investors. So if we can hold here, that would be great. But, the one thing as well is, and I sent this out in my morning post, but yes, bonds are in a downtrend, right? Remember, going back, I was talking to a colleague about this last night, and remember the beginning of the year, and this fact about, we always hear predictions from people, right? One of the big predictions I heard from people was, go long bonds, go long bonds. That's going to be the trade of 2023, right? I haven't heard that too much. I've heard about some of the bearish positioning in bonds and so forth, but ultimately price is going to tell you. And we know that bonds have been in a downtrend. They've flirted with getting back above the 200-day moving average, kind of had a head and shoulders, and they broke down here. So this is not a great place of strength. Like I said, what I would like to see is a further bounce from here, but overall the trend is not good, right? And that's where, now we can kind of look at that weekly chart, because we do have a weekly bar here. And if we do break the lows of what we saw earlier this month, then I would say we might be looking at moving to the bottom of the value area, right? That's where we were. That's where we got to last year. That was a nice reversal off of this virgin point of control, where there is demand here. And I would have to think like 119.28 could be a level. So, think things through a little bit. If we do break those lows, right, we know that August is a weaker seasonal month. That could be where volatility arises from. So again, I think it's nice to see them rebound a little bit today. Am I convinced that bonds are going to shoot back up? Not yet. So it's going to be a must watch. And I think if you're worried about equity volatility, this is one area that you want to keep an eye on. All right. We might as well talk a little bit about the VIX too, because the VIX was up to 15 yesterday and is back down about 7.5% today. Here's what the weekly chart looks like, right? You can't even really see that volatility on the weekly chart. So we know that we're right now in a lower volatility regime, right? A spike up to 15 is really not that big of a situation, on our hands. And for now, it's another lower high, and that's was the story that we've been kind of dealing with for a while now, is just lower highs in the VIX. Eventually, we are going to see a spike up in the VIX. That's kind of inevitable, that eventually that there is volatility from time to time. There are market dips, there are market corrections. I can't tell you when that's going to happen, but at some point we are going to have another dip in equities. And again, maybe that happens in August, maybe it's September, I don't know. And it's not my place to really try to predict that type of thing. But yes, looking at this VIX chart, right? And I don't really want to do major analysis on a VIX chart, but here was when we peaked out here at 38, all the way back in here, lower high, lower high, lower high, lower high, lower high, lower high, lower high. So you get the picture, lower high, lower high, lower high, and another lower high. So again, right now, we're at a very low level in the VIX, and I'll just leave it there. Let's talk a little bit about how we ended the week in equities. So we'll start with the S&P chart as always, and we're still consolidating around that virgin point of control. That is sometimes what happens once we go and we take one of these virgin point of controls out. We're bouncing around this range, right? And this is, that's not an easy thing to deal with as a trader, because there's a lot of starts and stops this week. So is that surprising that we had a lot of starts and stops this week? Well, not if you kind of put things in perspective. Remember, as we kind of came into the week, right, we knew that we had a Fed meeting, right? We know that we have tons of earnings reports that were going to come out this week. So yes, I thought that we would get some type of volatility, and it kind of came when personally, like, I wasn't expecting it yesterday, right? I was expecting it with some of the other, bigger earnings reports that we had. So it's funny how the market just always keeps you on your toes. Sometimes when you feel like, oh, geez, we made it past the Fed meeting and so on and so forth, you kind of sometimes see the light at the end of the light at the end of the tunnel. But sure enough, there was something that probably you weren't thinking too hard about, that yields were going to go higher, and part of that was because of the Bank of Japan. But that's what kind of did it. But overall, one of the things I said in yesterday's video is that one day does not make a trend, and we did find support right where we needed to, and that's what the value, how the valuaries really helped me, right? And looking at volume at price is that, price made it down to the bottom of the value, and by the way, so first of all, this is not an easy week to deal with, right? When you've got up, a move like this, and then a check back all the way back in here, and then a nice rally today. So we actually finished the week above the value area. Again, it's not something that I did not hit every turn perfectly this week. I thought this was a challenging week to trade because a lot of those starts and stops. But hey, again, was it unexpected that this was going to be a difficult week? No, given all the events that we had this week. But yes, we held that 45.61.75 bottom of value perfectly. Notice that we didn't even get a closing bar below value. So that's what the valuaries do for me is they give us they give us a roadmap of watching important support and resistance levels. All right, so that's what this looks like. If we want to gloss over the Qs too, we can do that, right? And again, like you could see for the Qs, right, we basically spent the whole week inside value exploring the ranges. This broke down a little bit below value, a little bit more than the S&P did, but came back very impressive. Right, the price action today after yesterday, and that's what's been kind of also kind of difficult for some traders, including myself. When we see a reversal day like we did yesterday, usually there's some downside follow through. And again, it's just, I think it's one of those things that, again, you go back to the saying, one day does not make a trend. And we didn't break any support, yesterday. But again, it's just, I think just shows the strength of this market, that it just is not breaking down. And you're really not getting too much volatility, other than one day of volatility, which again could happen at any point. You know, we kind of end the week on a very strong point. So here's what Qs look like. Of course, weekly chart still very strong. Yes, we're back and forth. We're exploring these ranges. We don't know, we haven't taken out the previous high, but we're above all these short-term moving averages. And I think that's good enough for now. We need more information. IWM, also kind of doing that thing of, consolidating all over the place. This, I think you really have something interesting to watch. Not so much on the 1 hour chart, but this is a good visualization that we did take out that virgin point of control yesterday, and that was a pretty firm rejection, and amazing all the way down to the bottom of value. This did break through a little bit and then came back, but not as strong as the other two indices, which or especially the S&P, who made it back through the value area. Here is also on the weekly chart what is really interesting to me, right? We're closing right back at that top of value, 195.87. That's right around the highs of 2023. And again, using volume at price, right? That's the value area for the year. Which is based on all of the activity from 2022, all of the volume, all the price activity from 2022. So it's not a shocker that we're having some difficulty and hesitation getting through that top of value, but I would really be paying attention to what happens there. The diamonds, after 13 days in a row, right? That got halted, lucky 13 yesterday, but back up again today. And this did make it through its value area, right? That was the story basically last week for me, was that the Dow made it through the value area last week, and a little bit of follow through. All right, so that's the indices. I mentioned I would go over some of the performance, and of course, when you look at what topped the list, maybe not the pot stocks, because I keep them on my spreadsheet just for the hell of it, but the Chinese internet names were up over, it's amazing where that performance is coming from, because the Chinese markets were up last night, but they were not up that much, right? And it's kind of interesting to see that type of movement, right? So when you look again, it's always important to kind of watch what China does overnight, because it will give you a clue if the Chinese internet ETF and some of the other names too are going to have some momentum to them. But here's what the Hang Seng did for the week, right? You can kind of see the local market, right? It was up decently. I think, let me just put in the stats here. Right, so up 4.4%. Now, the Chinese internet ETF was up over 12% this week. So interesting, and I'm not sure what to make of that quite yet. Why there's such bigger outperformance in the ADRs versus the actual, local ETF itself. There could be some currency effects in here as well. All right, so I will get to the weekly performance, but again, you had some interesting moves for the day. Also, one other thing that was different than yesterday that I wanted to touch upon really quickly is that the breadth was strong all day today, right? Versus yesterday, even though the Nasdaq had such a big move in the beginning of the day yesterday, the breadth did not confirm that yesterday, and that was something that we touched upon in the trading room that I mentioned. I said, hey, it's kind of interesting. The breadth's not that strong. So sometimes when you see those gap ups like we saw yesterday, you want to make sure that that breadth is with that move. And it was not yesterday. So that was a little bit of a warning signal. And today, because I was concerned that maybe we were going to, have that gap up into the open, but no follow through. But like I said, the breadth was strong, all day today. So that said, I've got a couple takeaways from earnings season, but I wanted to recap the weekly performance for you. All of the indices were green for the week. The Qs did outperform, up 1.8%. Let me see if I can zoom in here just a little bit. But again, look at the international and particularly the emerging markets, which were up 4% for the week. So I wanted to show that chart really quickly here. Here's the weekly chart, right? And it's beginning to kind of build. We don't really have like a major like breakout signal, right? We know that this data point or this weekly bar back in the middle of March was the low of the year, and that was right at the bottom of value. So there's still quite a distance that this could make and performance that this could get up into before there's some resistance, or even before that there's a breakout on the weekly chart. In regards to the daily chart, right, it's a little bit, this is actually a little bit more clear to see that there's about 43.56 and 42 could be those next levels above. But I like how this 200-day moving average is starting to curl up a little bit, and price is now basically above everything and starting to kind of make its way above the price action is making its way above the 200-day moving average. So that's EEM, and remember that's a group of different countries that are in that ETF, with China being the largest weight in emerging markets. Bonds were down 1.9%. Gold was all over the place this week, and that's usually the case when you have central bank meetings. I never really try to play precious metals for a swing trade during central bank meetings because they are all over the place. And the dollar was down a little bit for the week, even though it was up nicely yesterday. Growth outperformed value for the week, up 1.7% versus essentially flat for value. And again, here's the performance of the China group, which I'm going to go over here a little bit more in depth because of that outperformance was just so large. So let's start with, I'm going to start with the Chinese Internet ETF, and then we'll go into some individual names. But I think this is kind of constructive when you look at the weekly chart, right? Because the weekly chart, again, I don't usually go over until we get till Friday, or because up until then, obviously it's a developing bar. But I would watch this 32.82 level. It's really interesting because all the way down, I was seeing ETF inflows, right? When China really began to break down. But like many things, right, once you're in a big downtrend like this, you need some time to go sideways. And that's usually, instead of buying on the way down, right, strong, you probably have learned this from some technicians, that wait until the group or the stock stops going down, right, and starts turning back up. And that could be what we have in place right now. Right. So after some back and forth, because where we are is basically all the way back. You could go back to where we were in the beginning of 2022. This really hasn't gone anywhere over the last year. So if you think that you've missed something, right, or didn't time the bottom perfectly, this hasn't done anything yet. And notice as well, right, what's the difference between when this had made some attempts here? Look at how tight these moving averages have gotten. Right. And now you might have this, this effect here. And again, I would watch 32.82 for some confirmation, but it's starting to look pretty darn good technically for a break higher. So I think this is a must watch, after this week's performance. Again, it's going to have to deal with some overhead supply. You could see all these red lines that might make it kind of a difficult type trade. But this has me most intrigued, I think, to end the week. And if you go through some names, of course, and I just want to spend a quick minute here. I know this video is going to be kind of long, but it is an end of week recap. But notice what happened with this XPEV this week, right? Here's a case where we hit overhead supply, right? And notice what happened, right? You had to move. This was at 21 bucks. This thing closed all the way back down to about 19.50, right? So it got rejected on the first attempt. The sellers overwhelmed the buyers. However, the buyers kind of, made their attempt here and blasted through that virgin point of control. So the buyers actually overwhelmed the overhead sellers, right? That's a very strong move to be able to overcome that. Also note in here as well, the next area would be 27.90. when you look at this weekly chart, this is pretty impressive. And again, you're going to hear me say that a lot, but look at the volume as well, confirming that move. First candle into the value area for the year, which activates the 80% rule, right? Once you establish yourself for the first time inside value, there's an 80% chance that you could get through one side of the value area to the other. That's what you're looking at in this name. Now, of course, the other names within this group are very strong too. Here's NEO. That did crack into the value area. Again, it hasn't firmly established itself into the value area. But I was on Benzinga yesterday talking about that I thought NEO represented good risk to reward. So now basically watch that 14 level, right? And then this LI, very strong, also a nice weekly bar. And that's been the one that was really seeing some call activity about a week ago. All three, XPEV has really seen a lot of option activity too this week. A couple of the internet names, BIDU, right? Not a name that I've traded at all recently. But this also is setting up as an inverted head and shoulders. Again, I say setting up, it hasn't triggered yet. Watch for a break basically above 162.40. And this BIDU could get interesting. Remember, what's also notable here is China is now actively, providing some stimulus and intervening in their currency market. So they're on the opposite direction, right, of what the U.S. Fed is doing. All right, so I'll leave it there for this group. Let me turn back to a couple earnings names for this week, because for me, and everybody's different, right? But for me, for earnings season is the time, as I mentioned quite a bit, the time to really pay attention to what names have big reactions on earnings. What names are the institutions going to have to start accumulating a name that really wasn't something that they were paying attention to, right? And I think one of the nicest names this week, and there's a few from this week, but I think Boeing just made a huge move, finally out of this consolidation this week. Yep, and it did a lot of it on earnings, but it did get over the high point, right? And that was the virgin point of control that this thing got hung up on, right? So it is now through that, right? Notice what it's done. It's building off of earnings. So I think this can get up to 249. 70, that's the virgin point of control up there. And I think that's the next stop for Boeing. Doesn't mean it gets there in a straight line, but I love breaking out of multi-month bases like we're seeing in this one. How about this guy today? ROKU, right? I mean, another one too, that look at the side, again, it's not perfect. Like Boeing was a little bit more, I would say, neat. But you've got a nice move here. And again, if you zoom out, let's do this whole trick here with the weekly chart. Notice the VPOC takeout on the lows. And also same thing as we were looking at with the China Internet ETF. Look at what's going on here with the moving averages, all kind of bunched up like this and starting to kind of separate themselves. Now, this looks like a very bullish chart. Again, going back here, not so bullish. Double top and a big fall down. That was at $440, but it spent some time basing here. And I have to say, this looks very constructive. And I went long a little bit of this at the end of the day. Not that I want to buy a stock that's up, I think it was up 27% when I bought some, but it's a change in character. And that's a lot of times what you're going to see. Now, there's always a chance of false moves and so forth, but look at the volume in this thing. Now, I wish there was a little bit more short interest. There's about 10% short interest in ROKU, but I don't think that this move is done, regardless of what you think of the company, right? Because I don't know, I put out a Twitter question a couple of weeks ago about what people thought of ROKU. Some people were very negative. Some people were very positive. It was kind of interesting to me. And I listen, right? That's what I try to do when I ask questions like that, is listen to what people are saying, right? It's not a company that makes, I don't think that they're profitable, but it doesn't, the stock could be different. Remember, it's just a trade, right? People get very caught up passionately about what they think about a company. I would separate it into a trade with a stop, right? Otherwise, if you don't like it, that's fine too. There's plenty of other opportunities out there, right? You don't have to trade, any of them that you really have a personal vendetta against. But as people were telling me on Twitter a couple of weeks ago, but I think that this can maybe even move up to 113, right? And yeah, so again, I think it's a really nice technical setup. All right, guys, I'm going to leave it there, but we'll be going through more of these things. And again, for me, that's what I'm looking for takeaways out of earnings season is what names are what names are going to be surprising, which could be potential leaders for the next quarter or potential trading opportunities for the next quarter. So I think that we've got enough to deal with. I've started my earnings watch list, which is basically a combination of gaps and strong earning moves. And I already have about 30 names on that list. So I think that there's going to be some good opportunities over the next quarter. Guys, have a great night. If you're not a member of Tribeca Trade Group, by the way, you can go to tribecatradegroup.com. You could still get, if you're a new member, you could still get 50% off your first month. You could just put in the coupon code, which I think I have in here someplace. It's TTG 2023. Again, that's for new members. You get half off your first month. So you could check out what we do on a daily basis. Have a great night and have a great weekend, everybody.